What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the MCU in chronological order. This time, we're taking a look at the 10th film into this series and the overall 15th film into the greater MCU with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, written and directed by James Gunn. So let's waste no time. Let's get right into it. So the overall story of Volume 2 is this. The Guardians of the Galaxy have been doing their thing for the last couple of months prior to the event, after the event of the first movie. In this movie, they're going on their space adventures, they're getting in trouble with alien races, and Peter Quill finds out who his father is, and he finds out that his father, his name is Ego, who is an ancient celestial being of immense power, who pretty much wants to do some not so good things. So yeah, that is the overall baseline story of Volume 2. Let's go over it some more. I think when I compare Volume 1 to Volume 2, I think Volume 1 has a better story going forward that's more focused. While Volume 2, it tries to juggle more than just one story. Like Volume 2 tries to juggle like at least 3 separate stories. And for the most part, James Gunn's able to do a good job with it. And then on the other hand, there are times where he's biting off more than he can chew. Like he tries to make, like Volume 2 is a movie that tries to go bigger and more grander. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the story can be muddled in a lot of can get muddled in a lot of areas, and a lot of focus can go all over the place. But but for lack of trying, he does his best to make this movie come across as coherent as possible, despite trying to tell the greater story of Peter Quill and his dad, while also trying to expand upon other stories like with Nebula and Gamora, and with Yondu, and with this alien race known as the Sovereignty. So, James Gunn, he's juggling as many plot points as possible, and he's trying to make them all mesh into a cohesive narrative. For the most part, he's able to do it. And in other areas, it kind of falters a little bit. So, but as an overall movie and as an overall experience, I like Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I think compared to the first one, this movie is actually better directed. I think this movie is undeniably just gorgeous to look at. Like the cinematography in Volume 2 compared to Volume 1 is absolutely beautiful. This movie is something Jack Kirby would have been proud of. It is bright, it is splashy, it is colorful. It doesn't have that typical MCU look where it looks just like plain and dull. This actually has some vibrancy to it, and I like it a lot. Like I like the overall aesthetics of this movie from a production standpoint. The aesthetics of this movie is beautiful. The CGI in a lot of areas looks really, really well done, especially in the opening fight scene where the Guardians are taking on this alien through and they have electric space orchestra playing in the background with Baby Groot. I think that whole opening sequence is just as good as the first opening sequence with Peter Quill. So like James Gunn, he did a great job with the visual style of this movie. This movie is gorgeous to look at. It is very bright and it is very colorful. In terms of the performances, pretty much every single actor brings their game. Like I can't say that the acting in this movie is bad because I'd be lying. The 5 members of the Guardians of the Galaxy, they all play their roles exceptionally well. Chris Pratt, he is Star-Lord. He plays the role to a T. He brings that right amount of comedy and also that right amount of drama where one doesn't overshadow the other. Like when he needs to be serious, he can be serious. When he needs to be comedic, he be comedic. And in this movie more or less focuses more on the more serious side of Star-Lord, since he's dealing with the fact that he is coming to contact with his father and he's trying to juggle all of that. And of course, you got the stuff with Yondu towards the end of the movie, which I'm going to get to momentarily. But yeah, Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, you can't go wrong. Batista as Drax. Batista, he as Drax comes along, is more or less that guy who you like, but also says the wrong thing at the wrong time in some areas in this movie. But I overall like Drax as the character. I like Batista in the role, and he does have some fun moments here and there. I like the budding relationship he has with this new character called Mantis. Of course, if you know your MCU lore, it's revealed that Mantis and Peter Quill are now brother and sister. But this was her first appearance, and I like that the movie teases a budding romance between Drax and Mantis. And I think Batista and the actress Paula Kalimentif, if I said her name wrong, I'm sorry, have decent on-screen chemistry with one another. And since I didn't see Guardians of the Galaxy 3 yet, I hope that James Gunn actually did, bring these two together, because he's been teasing it since this movie, and I like the chemistry and the relationship between Mantis and Drax. It's like a I actually think it's well done. I mean, I think there are moments where Drax can be a little bit too mean to Mantis, and it's really uncalled for. But that is what it is. Instead, I did like what I get. And I like the whole idea of Mantis being this telepath who can feel other people's emotions, and what really brings Mantis and Drax closer is when Mantis feels the pain that Drax feels, which is the loss of his family. So I like that stuff. I thought that stuff was actually really well handled. uh, Bradley Cooper as Rocket. I love Rocket. I love Bradley Cooper's vocal performance as Rocket. It's hilarious. Rocket, he has some good things to do. I like how this movie starts off with Rocket. Pretty much this movie starts off because Rocket stole some batteries, and he got the Guardians in trouble by this alien race known as the Sovereignty. And because of that, Rocket's pretty much looked at as the asshole of the group, that people are really starting to find ways to not want to hurt or not want to like. And Rocket does it to himself. So I actually like Rocket's character journey, because Rocket's whole character journey is him learning to accept that he's part of a family now, and that he doesn't have to be on his own anymore. And a lot of that happens with his budding friendship with Yondu. That happens in the middle part of the movie. Like Rocket and Yondu, they got some of the best scenes in this movie, and they have the most awesome scene where they're taking out a bunch of Ravagers to come a little bit closer. That scene is fantastic. That scene is great. The chemistry between Rocket and Yondu, I think, is the best part of the movie. And they got the two best stories in the movie. Rocket's whole story arc is him learning to accept that he's part of a team, that he's part of a family, and he wants to push it all the way because it's almost as if he can't stand the loss of it. So I like that stuff. Yondu, on the other hand, his whole character journey is that of he wants to be accepted back into the Ravagers, but because he dealt in child trafficking, he's been exiled from the Ravagers because he broke the code. And also, he has to go through the whole thing of a mutiny that's happening because Yondu refuses to do something about Peter Quill and Peter Quill's actions. And of course, as we all know, Yondu views Quill as his son, and that's why he's never so harsh on him, because Yondu deep down loves Peter Quill like a son, and it's beautifully paid off at the end. But Yondu's movie I think is great. I like the cameo from Sylvester Stallone as Stilgar Ogard, who is a member of the Ravagers. I like the little scene that he has with Yondu, where Ogard who says, "You broke the code," blah blah. So that stuff is great. Like that sets up Yondu's character arc into becoming a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy in the third act of the movie. So it's all set up nicely, and of course that happens through his partnership and friendship with Rocket when they get captured by the Ravagers. So that stuff is great. Like Rocket and Yondu to me have the best storylines going on in this movie. Aside from, and also, and Quill's story is good also, but his story can get muddled in a lot of areas. But the two best stories to me are Rocket and Yondu because it's more focused, and they're more towards their character development, having them be these asshole characters to these heroic characters when you get to the end. So I like that stuff. All that stuff is great. The supporting cast that surrounds the Guardians, I think everyone did their role okay. You have the actors who played the members of the Sovereignty; they're all right. The Sovereignty are pretty much a villain race, or like a race that are played for comedic laughs, and they're peppered all throughout the movie. I mean, every time they're on screen, they kind of take away from everything because I don't find them to be all that interesting. Especially the character of Aisha, who I think is just there. And just the race themselves. Like you can take the Sovereignty out of the movie and it would be the same thing, because you really want to know. All you need is ego, and all you need are the rogue Ravagers that are against Yondu. You don't need the Sovereignty. The Sovereignty you're adding something that doesn't need to be there. Every time the sovereignty appear on the screen, my interest levels goes down. I mean, the only thing that they're good, the only thing that the sovereignty does of any note is establish who they are and establish the threat of Adam Warlock in the during the mid credits of the movie. That's basically it. Other than that, they're just there to get the plot moving when Rocket steals batteries that belong to them. And then you see them peppered all throughout the movie where they're making deals with Ravagers and just appearing out of nowhere to attack the Guardians. That's basically it. They take away from the story a lot. But what does not take away from the story that I actually think is actually beautifully expanded upon is the sister relationship between Gamora and Nebula. Now, in the first Guardians movie, it's established that these two have a rivalry for one another. Nebula hates Gamora, though Gamora is the exact opposite, that she pities her sister more. And we get more of an extension of that feud in this movie, in which Nebula goes through her character journey. And she goes through one of the most underrated character journeys in the MCU because because Nebula now is going from being a pretty much at the side of Thanos to now to the side of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And this movie pretty much starts Nebula's character journey to becoming an overall Avenger or a member of the Avengers as well. And I think it's handled very beautifully. And the best scene of this movie is where Gamora and Nebula are hashing out their differences, and Nebula has that great line where all she ever wanted was to have a sister, and that gets through Gamora, and that's the beginning of their mending, and that's the beginning of their friendship. That's the beginning of their sibling friendship in a way. I thought Zoe Saldana and Karen Gillian did really well in their roles of Gamora, and did really roles as Gamora and Nebula. And I also like how James Gunn expanded more on the romantic relationship between Gamora and Quill as well. So I like that stuff. Like Zoe Saldana, she's just a really good actress. I like her as the character of Gamora. She's more or less, well, Peter Quill may be the leader. Gamora is the one who holds everyone together. She's almost as if she's kind of got like that motherly type of role to her, where she's not afraid to put some people in their place when they go out of line. So I like that about her character. And you got Nebula, who is the hothead, who just wants to get revenge on Gamora, not mainly because in Nebula's eyes, she was always Gamora was always favored, and all Nebula wanted was just to have a sister by her side. Well, like I said, it all gets paid off. Gets paid off nicely when Gamora and Nebula make amends, and Nebula joins the Guardians in the final fight against Ego. Okay, so I've been holding it off long enough. Let's finally talk about Ego, played by Kurt Russell. Now, I'll say this: I'm a fan of Kurt Russell. I love Kurt Russell. I love him as Ego. I thought he put in a fun performance. He and Chris Pratt had genuine chemistry with one another, and it's just Kurt Russell. Kurt Russell just has charisma for days in general, and I like I like the scenes with Kurt Russell and Chris Pratt where they're doing their whole father and son bonding process. I like how we learn more about Star-Lord's alien heritage with him being a Celestial. I like the whole idea of Ego pretty much being powered by his own planet. Of course, as the movie goes forward, we find out that that Star-Lord is not the only child of Ego. He's had many more children, but they all failed him, and they're all dead. So pretty much Ego sucked out their life force as a way to keep his planet operating. It's kind of sort of like a battery, as he would describe. So I like how Ego starts off as being like, this, quirky, nice guy, almost pseudo nice guy who wants to spend time with his son. But as the movie progresses, we find out that there's much more to his character. He just wants to use his son and drain out his alien power to keep himself alive. So Ego ends up coming across as just as extraordinary villainous. Of course, we get more to the backstory. We find out that when Ego was on Earth during the 80s, we find out that Ego courted his mother, gave birth to her, which gave birth to Quill, who gave birth to Quill, blah 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 blah. So yeah, on one hand, I think Kurt Russell's performance as Ego is a lot of fun. He has good chemistry with Chris Pratt. On the other hand, I think once the movie breaks down into this third act and Ego goes full blown villainy, it kind of takes away from his character a little bit, because I like what they're going for initially, as somebody who in his own mind he thinks he's doing what's right, but it's really just being villainous. Like, you're just killing everyone to keep yourself alive, basically. But but I think compared to Ronan, Ego is the much better villain, mainly because he has a lot more menace to him when he needs to be menacing, and it's the fact that Kurt Russell's a better actor than Lee Pace. I'm sorry, and not only that, Ego does have a lot of good moments. Like, I like the moments with him and Quill. I like the little no, I like the little things that they do with each other, like playing ball for the first time. And I like when Quill has the revelation that it was Ego who's the one who killed his mother by giving her cancer, because he couldn't because every time he would come to Earth, he would lose his power, and he knew that if he would come to Earth for one more time, his power would be completely gone. So he basically killed Quill's mom by giving her cancer. I like all that stuff. That's where Ego's villainy comes in, because he gave the woman he loved cancer just out of sheer, just because he couldn't live with the fact of losing his godlike status as a celestial. Hence why he's called Ego. Of course, this all leads to the very bombastic third act, which is a lot of fun and very well done. So I don't really have too much to complain about, except the fact that the Sovereignty make an unnecessary appearance, and I could have done without them. Like, this alien race are like cockroaches; they just won't go away in this movie. Every time I see these gold bastards, I want Ego just to wipe them all out, because I think they're annoying. To me, the Sovereignty takes away from Ego, who is already kicking the Guardians' ass, because he's this massive planet. He's using everything at his disposal, and the Guardians got to come together to take him down. Of course, I do like how when Yondu crashes into Ego's palace, he says, "Remember me, jackass." Because if you watch the first movie, you know, Yondu was the reason why Yondu kidnapped Quill was because he was going to deliver Quill to Ego. Of course, we find out that Yondu has no love for Ego. I would have liked to have seen an exchange between Yondu and Ego, or more of an exchange with Yondu and Ego, instead of the little exchange that we got. I think you could have gotten much more out of that. However, I do like the dynamic. I like the dynamic of, even though Ego is Quill's birth father, he's not his daddy. Yondu is Quill's daddy. Yondu is Quill's real father. Which is why after the Guardians defeat Ego and the planet's all exploding, Yondu has to make the sacrifice play in order to save Quill's life. And he does that by making the sacrifice play and killing saving Quill's life. And of course, as if we find out that, Yondu always loved Quill as a son. Best line of the whole movie: "He may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy." The final words of Yondu to Peter Quill. The Quill's real father saves his life. The man who raised Quill saved his life, while his real father tried to end his life. I like that stuff. And it leads to a great ending where Yondu gets like this hero's funeral, and all the Ravagers that exiled him, they come back out of respect for him, and they give him the Ravager funeral they accept him back as a Ravager. I like the ending, especially when it's being done to Cat Stevens' father and son song, which is beautiful, and it ties everything up very, very nicely. And what makes it also work is that James Gunn didn't force in any jokes to undercut a very somber moment with Yondu's funeral, which I appreciate and which I like. Actually, a lot of this movie, James Gunn knew when and when not to do his when to do and when not to do that typical Marvel humor. He implemented it in places where it needed to be done, and then he knew when to back down when he needed to let more dramatic scenes breathe. So I like that stuff. I thought it was handled very, very well. Oh, also, before I wrap up, there's this secondary antagonist called Taserface, who's the one who starts the mutiny against Yondu. And I like the whole running joke of Rocket constantly making fun of his name, even though Taserface tries to come across as menacing. Everyone makes fun of his name and saying Taserface, and everyone just laughs at him. I think the actor who played Taserface was also very hilarious, and he has some of my favorite lines as well. Like when when someone asks him, "Hey, are you going to kill Baby Groot?" He's like, "No, he's too damn adorable." I like that stuff. That's the Marvel humor working to its advantage and working to the story, as opposed to undercutting the story. So yeah, Taserface, I like the character of Taserface. He was a fun little villain that was mostly for Yondu. But yeah, so back to the ending. So yeah, Yondu gets his Ravager funeral. We see Stallone and his Ravager team come back. The end credits tease of him returning in the future. So yeah, that's basically the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Overall, I do like this movie. It does have a lot in it. It does have a lot going for it. There are certain times where the story can get muddled in a lot of areas. But damn it, I am still very entertained by this movie. I still like it very much. I like James Gunn's directing. I like the visual presentation of this movie. This movie is beautiful to look at. James Gunn fully embraces that more cosmic aspect of the MCU with this movie, which is something that I love because I like seeing the more otherworldly side of the MCU as opposed to the whole grounded human side of the MCU, earthly side of the MCU, which can get boring sometimes. Like I like going out into the galaxy and being more creative and more bombastic and more comic booky with it. So that stuff was cool. Do I think this movie is better than the first? There are times where it tells a better story than the first, and then there are times where it's trying to do a little bit too much and it kind of loses focus in a lot of areas. I think if you cut down the sovereignty aspect and you tighten up more of Peter Quill's father, more with more of Yondu's story, and you could have had a much more better focused movie. But for what we get, it is a focused movie still, but it just has a lot of stuff going on all around it. So at the end of the day, I'm going to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 I'm going to give it a solid 8 out of 10 because I do like this movie a lot. It is very entertaining. I know some people don't like this, but I like it. So yeah, 8 out of 10 for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. Let me know your thoughts in the comment sections down below. Like the video and subscribe, and I'll check you back next time for more.